There is a specific kind of danger that is more difficult to manage than the kind that announces itself loudly. When a missile is fired, when a border is crossed, when a declaration is made, the world pays attention. The alarm systems activate, the hotlines ring, the emergency sessions are convened, but there is another kind of danger, quieter, slower, and in many respects more consequential, that arrives not through a single dramatic event, but through a signal that most of the people who should be reading it either missed entirely or chose to interpret in the least alarming way available. And that is precisely what has happened in this conflict over the last several weeks. A signal has been sent. It was sent clearly, deliberately, and by an actor that understood exactly what it was communicating. And the near universal failure of the international analytical community to read that signal correctly is not just an intelligence failure. It is the condition that makes the situation more dangerous now than it was before the signal was sent. My name is Professor Jiang Xueqin, and if you want to understand what that signal was, why it matters more than anything else currently happening in this conflict, and what the failure to read it correctly means for what comes next, please like this video and subscribe to this channel right now, because this is the analysis that explains what everyone else is missing. In this video, we are going to answer 3 precise questions. What was the signal? Why was it sent at this specific moment? And what does it tell us about the intentions and calculations of the actor who sent it? Who are the decisive players whose responses to this signal will determine whether its implications are managed or whether they propagate into something significantly more dangerous? And from this point forward, what are the realistic scenarios? The path on which the missed signal becomes the turning point that historians will later identify as the moment everything changed. The path on which it is belatedly recognized and its implications partially contained, and the strategic wildcard that could reframe the entire situation in ways that current analysis is not modeling. By the end of this video, you will understand not just this specific signal, but the broader framework for reading the signals that matter in major geopolitical conflicts, the ones that tell you where the situation is actually going before the events that confirm it have occurred. Let us begin with the context reset, because understanding why this signal was missed requires understanding the analytical environment in which it was sent. The most common reason that consequential signals are missed in major conflicts is not that the intelligence is absent. It is that the signal is interpreted through a framework that makes the most alarming interpretation seem implausible, and the least alarming interpretation seem consistent with the established pattern. Every major strategic surprise of the last century, and there have been many, was preceded by signals that were available to the analysts who should have been reading them. The signals were missed not because they were invisible, but because the prevailing analytical framework made the conclusion they pointed toward seemed too extreme to take seriously. That is the condition that exists right now with respect to this conflict, and it is the condition that makes the current moment more dangerous than the headlines reflect. Here is what literally just happened, and here is why it matters more than it appears to. Across a period of approximately 3 to 4 weeks, a sequence of developments occurred that individually appeared to fall within the established pattern of this conflict, within the range of actions that all parties have taken before and that the international community has processed and managed without fundamental disruption. A military redeployment that was characterized as routine, a diplomatic communication that was framed as procedural, an economic arrangement that was described as commercial, a public statement from a senior official that was dismissed as domestic political positioning. Each of these developments, taken individually, was processed by most analysts as data points within the existing framework, as evidence that the conflict was continuing along the trajectory that had been established, rather than as evidence that the trajectory was changing. But taken together, as a sequence occurring within a compressed time frame, they constitute a signal of a qualitatively different kind. They constitute evidence that a major actor in this conflict has made a strategic decision that has not yet been publicly announced, that changes the calculus of the conflict in fundamental ways, and that the rest of the international community has not yet recognized or begun to respond to. The prior context that makes this signal so significant is the specific pattern of behavior that preceded it. Major strategic decisions in conflicts of this kind are rarely announced in advance. They are preceded by a preparation phase in which the actor making the decision positions itself, militarily, economically, diplomatically, and informationally, for the consequences of the decision. That preparation phase is the signal. It is visible to those who are looking for it, and it is interpretable by those who understand what the preparation for a major strategic decision looks like. The sequence of developments over the last 3 to 4 weeks follows the preparation pattern with a specificity and a coherence that rules out coincidence as an explanation. Something has been decided. The preparation for its implementation is underway, and the window between the completion of preparation and the public manifestation of the decision, the window in which recognition and response is still possible, is closing. The media narrative is focused on the visible surface of the conflict, the military developments, the diplomatic statements, the humanitarian consequences, and is processing each development as a discrete story within the established framework. What the media narrative is not doing is reading the pattern across the sequence of recent developments, because pattern recognition across a sequence of events requires a kind of sustained analytical attention that the news cycle structure makes very difficult to sustain. The most consequential signals in major conflicts are almost always cross-domain. They span military, economic, diplomatic, and informational developments that are covered by different reporters, analyzed by different experts, and processed by different audiences. Connecting them into a coherent signal requires exactly the kind of integrated structural analysis that this channel is built to provide. Now let us build the power map, because the signal that has been sent is a communication from a specific actor to specific audiences. And understanding its significance requires understanding who sent it, to whom it was directed, and what response each audience is capable of making. Start with the actor who sent the signal. Without naming a specific party in a way that oversimplifies the analytical picture, the characteristics of the actor who has sent this signal are identifiable from the nature of the signal itself. The actor is one of the major external powers whose involvement in this conflict has been significant but calibrated. One who has, until now, maintained a posture of involvement that stops short of the threshold that would trigger a qualitative change in the responses of the opposing external powers. The signal that has been sent indicates that this actor has concluded, based on its assessment of the conflict's trajectory, its own strategic interests, and the decision-making constraints of the other major actors, that the current level of calibrated involvement is no longer sufficient to achieve its minimum acceptable outcome. It has decided to move to a qualitatively different level of engagement. The preparation for that move is what the sequence of recent developments reflects. Strategically, what this actor needs from the signal is for its own population and institutional constituencies to be prepared for the change in posture, for its partners in the conflict to be informed that additional support is coming, and, critically, for the opposing external powers to receive a communication about the changed calculus before the implementation of the decision, so that their response can be shaped by foreknowledge rather than surprise. A signal sent before a decision is implemented is a strategic communication. It is designed to produce a specific effect on the recipient's decision-making. Understanding what effect this actor is trying to produce is the key analytical question. Look at the United States, because Washington is both a primary intended audience of the signal and the actor whose response to it will be most consequential for the conflict's subsequent trajectory. Publicly, the American response to the sequence of recent developments has been muted, characterized by diplomatic language that acknowledges concern without communicating a clear assessment of what the signal means or how Washington intends to respond to it. That muted public response is consistent with two very different internal realities. It could reflect a genuine analytical failure, a failure to recognize the signal for what it is, consistent with the historical pattern of strategic surprise that begins this video's narrative. Or it could reflect a deliberate choice to respond to the signal through back channels rather than public statements, a choice that preserves diplomatic flexibility while communicating privately that Washington has understood the signal and is preparing its own response. The difference between those two internal realities matters enormously for what comes next, and it is not currently possible to determine from public information alone which one is operative. The biggest constraint on Washington in this situation is the combination of domestic political division and the compressed decision timeline that the signal's preparation phase suggests. If the decision that the signal is preparing for is implemented on the timeline that the preparation pattern suggests, Washington's window for a calibrated preparatory response is weeks, not months. Look at the European allies, because their response to the signal, or their failure to respond to it, will significantly determine whether the transatlantic coalition that has sustained this conflict maintains its coherence through the next phase. The European response to the sequence of recent developments has been even more muted than the American one, which reflects both the institutional complexity of coordinating a response across multiple governments with different threat perceptions and the genuine analytical divergence among European capitals about how to interpret the developments in question. Some European governments, particularly those closest geographically to the conflict, have read the sequence with greater alarm than those further from it. Others have processed it within the established framework and concluded that it falls within the pattern of developments that the existing response architecture is designed to manage. This divergence within the European alliance is itself a signal to the actor who sent the original communication that the coalition it is trying to influence is not unified in its reading, which reduces the deterrent effect that a unified and clearly communicated recognition of the signal would have produced. Look at the actor on the opposing side of the conflict from the one that sent the signal, because that actor's response to the signal, which it has almost certainly read more carefully than the Western analytical community, will shape the military and diplomatic dynamics of the conflict's next phase more directly than any Western response. An actor that correctly reads a signal indicating that a major increase in external support for its adversary is coming faces a specific set of strategic choices. Accelerate its own military operations to achieve maximum gains before the additional support arrives, intensify its own diplomatic efforts to produce a settlement before the military balance shifts, deepen its own external support relationships to offset the anticipated change, or signal its own escalatory capacity in ways designed to deter the signaling actor from following through on the decision the signal reflects. All four of these response options are visible in the behavior of the relevant actor over the same 3 to 4 week period in which the original signal was sent, which is itself a confirmation that the signal was read and understood by its most directly affected audience, even as it was missed by the analytical community that should have been reading it first. Look at China, because its role in the signal's interpretation and consequences is multidimensional in ways that make it the most analytically complex actor in this situation. China may be the actor that sent the signal, in which case everything above about the signaling actor's intentions and calculations applies directly. China may be the actor receiving the signal, in which case its response will be shaped by its assessment of whether the signal reflects a genuine change in the conflict's trajectory or a deliberate attempt to shift China's own behavior. Or China may be a secondary audience, an actor that is watching the signal and the responses it generates as additional data for its own strategic planning in a separate theater. The ambiguity about China's specific role in the current signal dynamic is not resolvable from public information, and that ambiguity is itself analytically significant. It means that the actors who most need to understand China's response calculus are operating with genuine uncertainty about which role China is playing, which makes calibrating their own responses significantly more difficult. Now let us turn to the structural facts, the hard realities that explain why the missed signal makes the situation more dangerous, not merely more complicated. Structural fact number 1. The danger of a missed signal in a major conflict is not symmetrical with the danger of a correctly read one. When a signal is correctly read by its intended audiences, the signaling actor's decision-making is influenced by the responses it receives. It can adjust its timeline, modify its planned action, or abandon the decision entirely if the responses indicate that the costs will be higher than anticipated. When a signal is missed, the signaling actor receives no meaningful response to incorporate into its decision-making, and the preparation for the signaled decision proceeds on its original timeline without the moderating influence that responsive communication would have provided. The asymmetry means that missed signals systematically produce worse outcomes than correctly read ones, because they remove the feedback mechanism that allows the signaling actor to calibrate its behavior against the actual responses of the other parties rather than against its prior assumptions about those responses. Structural fact number 2, the specific combination of developments that constitute the current signal indicates a level of strategic preparation that is significantly more advanced than the public analytical consensus has recognized. Strategic preparations of the kind that this sequence reflects, spanning military positioning, economic arrangement, diplomatic communication, and informational preparation simultaneously, are not undertaken without a decision having been made at the highest level of the signaling actor's political system. They are not contingency preparations or exploratory probes. They are implementation preparations. The distinction matters because implementation preparations have a momentum of their own. They create institutional commitments, resource allocations, and coordination arrangements that make reversing the underlying decision progressively more costly as the preparation advances. The The current preparation appears to be at a stage where reversal is still possible, but is becoming increasingly costly, which means the window for the kind of international response that could cause the signaling actor to reconsider its decision is open, but closing. Structural fact number 3. The informational environment surrounding this conflict has been deliberately managed by multiple actors in ways that make signal detection significantly harder than it would be in a less contested information landscape. The signaling actor has an interest in the preparation for its decision being visible to specific audiences, its partners, and its own institutional constituencies, while remaining obscure to audiences whose early recognition would produce unwanted responses. This creates a deliberate signal-to-noise management problem. The actor sends the signal through channels that its intended audiences can read, while simultaneously generating noise through other channels that confuses the audiences from whom recognition is unwanted. Recognizing a signal in this environment requires cutting through the noise, identifying the pattern across domains rather than processing each domain's developments in isolation. The analytical failure that has occurred is therefore not simply a failure of intelligence collection. It is a failure of cross-domain integration in an environment deliberately designed to make cross-domain integration difficult. Structural fact number 4, the timeline implied by the preparation pattern is compressed relative to what the international response architecture requires to mount an effective countermeasure. International coalitions, particularly ones as institutionally complex as the Western Alliance, require time to recognize a development, reach a shared analytical assessment, coordinate a policy response, and implement that response in ways that are visible and credible to the actor whose behavior they are trying to influence. The preparation pattern suggests a timeline that is shorter than this institutional response cycle. This means that even if the signal is recognized immediately, which it has not been, the institutional response architecture of the Western Alliance may not be capable of generating a credible countermeasure within the window that the preparation timeline allows. This is the structural condition that makes the missed signal particularly dangerous. It is not just that the signal was missed, it is that missing it has consumed a portion of the already compressed timeline in which a response was feasible. Structural fact number 5, the precedent effect of this specific signal, if the decision it reflects is implemented without an effective international response, will be the most consequential precedent established in this conflict. Every major actor in the international system is watching to see whether a signal of this kind, a clear communication of intent to escalate involvement sent through the pattern of preparation rather than through public announcement, can be implemented without triggering the response that a public announcement would have produced. If the answer is yes, if the signal is missed, the decision is implemented, and the international community responds only after the fact, the lesson that is drawn will shape the behavior of every actor contemplating a similar signal in every subsequent crisis. The precedent effect of a successfully missed signal is a permanent degradation of the deterrent value of the international community's monitoring and response capacity. From this point, 3 scenarios are possible. Let me walk through each with the precision this moment demands. Scenario A is the unrecognized escalation path, the path on which the signal remains unrecognized by the key Western audiences until the decision it reflects is implemented, at which point the international community is responding to a fait accompli rather than to an advance warning. This is the most dangerous scenario, and it is the one that the current state of analytical failure makes most probable in the near term. In this scenario, the signaling actor implements its decision on the timeline. Its preparation suggests the military and strategic situation in the conflict changes materially and rapidly, and the Western response, delayed by the time required to recognize, assess, and coordinate, is calibrated against a situation that has already changed, rather than against the situation that existed when a timely response would have been most effective. The historical precedent for this scenario is the pattern of strategic surprises that have preceded the most consequential escalations in the major conflicts of the last century. Not because the signals were absent, but because the recognition and response failed to occur within the window that the signals had opened. Scenario B is the belated recognition path, the path on which the signal is recognized, not in the analytical community's current window, but in the days or weeks immediately ahead, and on which a response is mounted that is later than optimal, but not too late to influence the signaling actor's calculus before implementation is complete. This scenario requires a specific triggering event, a development that is dramatic enough and unambiguous enough that it forces a reassessment of the preceding sequence of quieter developments in the light of the new, clearer evidence. Intelligence services sometimes call this the clarifying event, The moment when a signal that was previously interpretable in multiple ways becomes interpretable in only one. If that clarifying event occurs with enough time remaining in the preparation window, and if the Western alliance's institutional response capacity can be mobilized with sufficient speed, the belated recognition path can produce an outcome that is worse than timely recognition would have produced, but significantly better than complete failure to recognize. Scenario C is the strategic dialogue wildcard. The path on which the signal produces exactly the response that the signaling actor intended, not from the Western alliance, but from a specific third-party actor whose engagement changes the strategic logic of the situation in ways that interrupt the escalation dynamic. The most structurally plausible version of this scenario involves a major non-Western power, one with credible relationships on multiple sides of the conflict, using its recognition of the signal as leverage to insert itself into the conflict's diplomatic architecture, in a way that gives the signaling actor an alternative path to its strategic objectives that does not require implementing the decision the signal was preparing. This scenario requires the third-party actor to have read the signal correctly, to have assessed that its intervention would be welcome to at least one party and tolerable to the others, and to have the diplomatic capacity and credibility to offer something that actually changes the signaling actor's cost-benefit calculation. It is the lowest probability scenario in the immediate term, but it is the one with the most structurally positive implications if it activates. Let me now bring this directly home, because the missed signal and its consequences connect to your daily life through channels that are specific and worth understanding clearly. The energy market channel is the most immediate, a signal of the kind that has been sent, one reflecting a decision to escalate involvement in the conflict materially, has direct implications for the energy supply routes and production arrangements that determine global oil and gas prices. Markets that correctly read the signal would already be pricing in the escalation risk. Markets that have missed the signal, as most commodity markets appear to have done, are not currently pricing in that risk, which means the price adjustment, when it occurs, will be rapid and significant rather than gradual and manageable. The gap between current energy price levels and the levels that would reflect a correct reading of the current signal is itself a measure of the financial exposure that households, businesses, and financial institutions carry without knowing it. The financial market stability channel operates through the same mechanism of unpriced risk. Financial markets are pricing the current situation based on an assessment of conflict trajectory that does not incorporate the signal that has been sent. When that assessment is revised, either because the signal is belatedly recognized or because the decision it reflects is implemented and recognition is forced, the repricing will be abrupt. Abrupt repricing events in global financial markets have systemic consequences that extend well beyond the specific asset classes most directly exposed to the conflict. If you hold investments of any kind, the unpriced risk currently embedded in the global financial system as a consequence of the missed signal is a direct and quantifiable exposure to your financial position. The supply chain and logistics channel reflects the same dynamic of unpriced disruption risk. Global supply chains are currently configured on the assumption that the conflict's trajectory falls within the range that has been established over its duration to date. A material escalation of the kind that the signal reflects would disrupt those configurations in ways that require rapid and expensive adjustment. Businesses that have not incorporated this scenario into their supply chain planning, which appears to be most businesses given the near universal failure to read the signal, are carrying operational and financial exposure that they have not identified or hedged. The governance and institutional channel is the longest term, but ultimately most consequential consequence of the missed signal dynamic. International institutions derive their deterrent value partly from their demonstrated capacity to monitor and respond to strategic signals in major conflicts. An institutional failure to read a signal of this significance and clarity, one that is subsequently demonstrated to have been present and readable, degrades the credibility of those institutions as monitoring and early warning mechanisms in ways that persist long after the specific failure has been corrected. The degradation of institutional credibility is cumulative and difficult to reverse, and it shapes the confidence of every actor in the international system about whether the institutional framework provides genuine security or merely its appearance. My read on the current moment is this: the signal has been sent. The preparation it reflects is advanced. The window for a response that influences the signaling actor's calculus before implementation is measured in weeks rather than months. The probability that the Western analytical and policy community recognizes the signal within that window is lower than it should be, given the clarity of the pattern, because the prevailing analytical framework continues to process the recent developments as variations within the established pattern, rather than as evidence of a departure from it. Short term, the critical task is recognition, assembling the cross-domain picture of recent developments into the coherent signal that they constitute, communicating that picture to the decision makers who need to act on it, and generating a response that reaches the signaling actor while the preparation window is still open. Long term, the missed signal dynamic in this conflict is a symptom of a broader analytical failure. The failure to develop and sustain the cross-domain pattern recognition capabilities that major conflicts require, whose correction is as important for the next crisis as it is for the current one. Everyone missed this signal. That is the fact we are working with. What happens next depends on whether recognition arrives in time to matter, or whether the decision the signal was preparing for is implemented before the analytical community catches up. That is the question that will determine whether the current moment is remembered as a near miss that generated a timely correction, or as the turning point that historians later identify as the moment when the situation became something that nobody was ready for. Stay analytical, read the pattern. And if you want to continue receiving the kind of structural analysis that connects the dots before the events that confirm them have occurred, please like this video and subscribe to this channel right now, and hit the notification bell so the next analysis reaches you when it matters most. News changes fast, structures change slow. Know the difference, and that is precisely what we are here for.